There's a document that was hidden in the Egyptian desert for over 15 centuries, deliberately buried by someone who knew it was too dangerous to be destroyed, but too threatening to remain visible. When it was finally discovered in 1896 and published in 1955, it revealed something that explains why the world feels fundamentally broken, why human consciousness seems trapped in patterns of suffering and ignorance, and why 2,000 years of Christianity failed to deliver the transformation Jesus actually promised. The Gospel of Mary, one of the most suppressed texts in Christian history, preserves a teaching that Jesus gave to his most advanced student, a teaching about why reality feels like a prison and how consciousness can escape. But here's what makes this text so dangerous, that it had to be buried. The student who received this teaching, the one Jesus trusted with knowledge he never gave to his male disciples, was a woman, Mary Magdalene. And when she tried to share what Jesus taught her after his departure, the male disciples couldn't accept it, not because the teaching was wrong, but because their egos couldn't tolerate learning from a woman, especially one whom Jesus explicitly loved more than he loved them. This isn't feminist revisionism or modern projection onto ancient texts. It's what the Gospel of Mary states explicitly. Peter, the rock upon which the church was supposedly built, directly asks whether Jesus really preferred Mary to the male apostles. And the text's answer is devastating. Yes, he did. He gave her deeper teaching because she was ready for it in ways the men weren't. And when she tried to pass it on, their patriarchal conditioning prevented them from receiving the very wisdom that could have transformed Christianity into something utterly different from what it became. What was this teaching that Jesus gave Mary privately? What did she understand that the male disciples couldn't grasp? The Gospel of Mary preserves a cosmology that sounds like ancient mythology, but is actually precise psychological description of why human consciousness feels trapped, why the world seems broken, why suffering appears built into the structure of existence itself. Mary describes the soul's journey through hostile powers that attempt to trap consciousness in material reality. She names them specifically darkness, desire, ignorance, and wrath. These aren't demons in the literal sense. They're forces, both psychological and cosmic, that keep awareness imprisoned in limited ego identification, that make you believe you are nothing but a body, nothing but your thoughts, nothing but your conditioned personality. Darkness is the fundamental ignorance of your true nature, the forgetting of what you were before you were born into this body, before you took on this personality, before you became trapped in the illusion of separation. It's the darkness of believing that material existence is all there is, that consciousness begins at birth and ends at death, that you are fundamentally isolated, separate, alone. This darkness isn't something you choose. It's the default state of incarnation, the fog that descends when infinite consciousness contracts into finite form. Desire is the mechanism that keeps you attached to material existence even when it brings suffering. It's not just sexual desire or greed, though it includes those. It's the fundamental grasping, the constant reaching for the next thing that will finally bring satisfaction, the belief that fulfillment comes from outside yourself, from acquiring, achieving, experiencing more. Desire keeps you always future-oriented, always seeking, never arriving, because the structure of desire is that it cannot be satisfied. Every fulfillment of one desire immediately generates another. You're designed to remain in perpetual lack, perpetually seeking, never finding rest. Ignorance is specifically ignorance about the soul's origin and destiny, about where you came from before birth and where you're going after death, about your true identity beyond the temporary personality. This ignorance isn't just not knowing, it's active misidentification, mistaking the temporary for the permanent, the conditioned for the essential, the ego for the self. And because you don't know who you actually are, you build your entire life on false foundations, on defending and maintaining an identity that was never real to begin with. Wrath is the defensive reactivity that protects the false identity, the ego's rage when threatened, the violence that emerges when your self-image is challenged. It's not just anger at others, but the internal warfare, the self-attack, the shame and self-hatred that come from failing to live up to the image of who you think you should be. Wrath is how the prison maintains itself, through constant conflict, internal and external, that keeps consciousness fragmented, divided, at war with itself. What Mary understood, what Jesus taught her privately, is that these powers aren't just personal psychological issues. They're structural features of material existence itself, the architecture of the prison that consciousness has fallen into. The world feels broken because consciousness is trapped by these powers, operating in darkness about its true nature, driven by insatiable desire, lost in fundamental ignorance, defended by reactive wrath. And every human institution, every social structure, every cultural system operates according to these same powers, because they are built by consciousness that's trapped by them. This is why, despite all our technological advancement, Despite all our social progress, despite 2,000 years of Christianity supposedly spreading Jesus' message of love and transformation, the world remains fundamentally broken, because the actual teaching about why it's broken and how to escape was suppressed. The version of Christianity that survived and dominated wasn't the version that taught liberation from these powers through direct inner knowledge. It was the version that reinforced them, that kept people in darkness about their true nature, that manipulated desire through promises of heavenly reward, that maintained ignorance through requiring belief rather than knowledge, and that weaponized wrath against heretics, sinners, and anyone who threatened institutional authority. The Gospel of Mary preserves the other path, the one Jesus apparently taught to his most advanced student, the one that recognizes the powers for what they are and provides the method for transcending them. The soul, when it recognizes its true nature as neither material nor bound by these powers, can pass through them without being captured, not by fighting them, not by trying to overcome them through willpower, but by seeing through their claims to authority, by recognizing that they have no power over what you actually are beneath all identification with body, personality, and ego. When Mary finished sharing what Jesus had taught her about the soul's ascent through these hostile powers, Andrew immediately rejected it. He said these teachings represent other ideas, implying they're not authentic to Jesus, that Mary must be confused or making things up. But then Peter revealed the real issue with a question that exposed everything. Did he really speak with a woman privately without our knowledge? Should we all turn and listen to her? Did he prefer her to us? This isn't theological disagreement. This is wounded male ego confronting the unbearable possibility that a woman might be spiritually superior, that Jesus might have given her teaching he didn't give to the men, that they might need to learn from her rather than her learning from them. Peter isn't questioning whether the teaching is true. He's questioning whether Mary has the right to teach it, whether a woman can be a legitimate spiritual authority, whether men should accept instruction from a female. And this patriarchal resistance, this inability to receive teaching from a woman regardless of its validity, this is precisely why Jesus had to give the deeper teaching to Mary privately in the first place. The male disciples weren't ready, not because they lacked intelligence or devotion, but because their conditioning, their socialization, their entire worldview was structured by the very powers Mary was describing. They were trapped in the darkness of patriarchal assumptions, driven by the desire for status and recognition, operating in ignorance about the nature of consciousness and spiritual authority, and defended by the wrath that emerges when male supremacy is threatened. Jesus recognized what every genuine spiritual teacher recognizes. Readiness matters infinitely more than gender, social status, or credentials. He gave advanced teaching to the student capable of receiving it, and that student happened to be a woman. This wasn't favoritism, it was wisdom. Recognizing wisdom, consciousness recognizing consciousness, a teacher seeing in a student the capacity for understanding that others lacked. But Peter and Andrew couldn't accept this because accepting it would require acknowledging that their patriarchal assumptions were among the powers keeping them trapped, that their certainty about male spiritual authority was itself a form of ignorance, that their reaction against Mary was precisely the wrath that maintains the prison. Levi, to his credit, saw this clearly and called it out. He told Peter directly that his resistance to Mary was identical to how the adversaries operate, those who oppose the gospel message. That if Jesus deemed Mary worthy by teaching her and loving her, then rejecting her was rejecting Jesus' judgment. That Jesus loved her more than he loved the male disciples, and they should acknowledge this rather than resent it. But Levi's position didn't prevail in the Christianity that survived to become institutional orthodoxy. Peter's position did. Women were systematically excluded from teaching and leadership. Texts like the Gospel of Mary that presented women as spiritual authorities were declared heretical and destroyed, and the teaching about consciousness being trapped by hostile powers and the method for transcending them was suppressed in favor of a religion that actually reinforced those powers while claiming to offer salvation from them. When the Gospel of Mary was buried, what was lost wasn't just one woman's voice or one alternative text. What was lost was the entire approach to spirituality that Mary represented: direct inner knowing over institutional authority, transformation of consciousness over conformity to doctrine, recognition that spiritual understanding can manifest anywhere regardless of gender or social position, and most importantly, the actual teaching about why the world is broken and how consciousness can escape the powers that trap it. The version of Christianity that survived gave you belief in correct doctrines instead of knowledge of your true nature. It gave you promises of future salvation instead of practices for present transformation. It gave you external religious observance instead of internal liberation. It gave you male hierarchical authority instead of wisdom wherever it manifests. And it gave you 2,000 years of reinforcing the very powers, darkness, desire, ignorance, wrath that Jesus apparently taught Mary how to transcend. This is why the world still feels broken. Not because humans are inherently sinful and need saving by an external savior, but because the teaching about how consciousness is trapped and how to free it was systematically suppressed. The version that survived keeps you in the prison while claiming to offer escape, keeps you identified with the powers while promising salvation from them, keeps you seeking answers outside yourself while the kingdom remains within, exactly where Jesus said it was, but where institutional Christianity taught you not to look. The contemporary relevance is immediate and obvious. You still live under the rule of these hostile powers. You still operate in darkness about your true nature, believing you are nothing but the limited personality, the conditioned patterns, the story you've been telling about yourself. You're still driven by insatiable desire, seeking fulfillment through external acquisition, constantly reaching for the next thing that will finally bring peace. You're still trapped in fundamental ignorance about consciousness itself, about what you were before birth and what you'll be after death, about the ground of awareness that includes but exceeds all personal identity. And you're still defended by wrath, reacting against anything that threatens your self-image, at war with yourself and others, maintaining the fragmentation that keeps the powers in control. The teaching Mary preserved offers a different path, not belief in correct doctrines, but direct recognition of these powers and their mechanisms, not waiting for external salvation, but doing the internal work of seeing through the powers' claims. Not following external religious authority, but trusting the direct inner knowing that emerges when consciousness recognizes its true nature. This is dangerous teaching because it makes you responsible for your own liberation, because it removes the comfort of external saviors and institutional mediation, because it demands that you face the powers directly rather than projecting them onto demons or devils or enemies outside yourself. The Gospel of Mary survived 15 centuries of suppression because someone understood it was too important to be completely destroyed, even though it was too threatening to remain publicly available. They buried it carefully enough that it lasted until conditions allowed its recovery. And what it reveals is that the teaching about why the world feels broken, why consciousness seems trapped, why suffering appears built into reality itself, this teaching was given by Jesus to the student who understood it best, who happened to be a woman, and when she tried to share it, patriarchal ego couldn't tolerate learning from her, so the teaching was suppressed and Christianity developed in the opposite direction, reinforcing the powers it should have been transcending. Peter asked if Jesus preferred Mary to the male disciples, and the text's answer is unambiguous. Yes, he preferred the student who understood over those who remained confused, trusted the disciple who grasped the spiritual essence over those still thinking literally, gave deeper teaching to the one ready to receive it, regardless of gender. This isn't ancient history, this is the ongoing pattern of how spiritual teaching gets transmitted and then suppressed, how consciousness recognizes itself across gender boundaries and social hierarchies, and how patriarchal systems work to prevent teachings that threaten their authority from reaching those who need them. The world still feels broken because the teaching about why it's broken and how to escape was buried. But the text survived, and what it offers is as relevant now as it was 2,000 years ago. The hostile powers are still operating, still keeping consciousness trapped in darkness, desire, ignorance, and wrath. And the path through them is still available for those ready to recognize these powers without being controlled by them, to see through their claims to authority, to discover what you actually are beneath all the conditioning and identification. If this exploration of the suppressed Gospel of Mary has revealed something about why your own experience feels trapped, why the world seems structured to prevent liberation, why 2,000 years of Christianity failed to deliver the transformation Jesus promised, then subscribe to this channel. Because we're continuing to recover the teachings that were deliberately buried, to examine why they were suppressed, and to translate ancient wisdom about consciousness into language that modern people can actually use to free themselves from the powers that still rule the world. Mary Magdalene understood what the men couldn't. Jesus trusted her with teaching they weren't ready for, and when she tried to share it, patriarchal conditioning prevented them from receiving the very knowledge that could have transformed everything. That pattern continues today, but the teaching survived. And for those ready to hear it without the defensive reactions that suppressed it originally, the path remains open exactly where Mary said it was, through recognizing the powers and discovering what lies beyond them.